So there it was, there in front of me, and I remember the service started, and you know, Protestant services are different because they operate more on a well, that person's already saved modem. So let's just talk to the people that are out there that maybe they can be saved still too, and so it becomes more of a let's join the gang instead of a remembrance, which you know are and so as that began. And the minister started out with the fact that he was going to explain something. He'd gotten permission from the family. And he began the speech about alcohol abuse and how it can lead to disaster. And it didn't take a genius to put two and two together to figure out how he ended up in that creek in that car and how that, you know, he didn't get out of the car and how the car caught on fire. And so I remember thinking, your own bad habits, your own nature ended up destroying you. Yeah, and I was really feeling it. I was smug as hell at that moment because, you know, hey, good job. You know, you had a beautiful wife. I can see her right over there. You had two little beautiful kids probably. And you couldn't resist being an a-hole for 4 seconds. And you got yourself wasted and you ended up dead. Well, good for you. And I was bitterly mad about the whole thing. And I remember once again the sermon went into, but yeah, he was saved because it didn't matter what he'd done, and I remember these words exactly. It didn't matter what he'd done in his lifetime. It didn't matter what sins he'd committed, but he was saved. He was going to heaven, and the anger raged up in me. The just fury. How dare he can't get into heaven? No, sorry, ain't happening, Mr. Minister Man. Because I'll tell you how his sins are. I hold him responsible for those sins still. If Jesus may have forgiven him, but I sure haven't. Although, you know, in the end it's Jesus that's the only one that matters. But at that moment, that didn't matter. No, I took umbrage again. I was excited. Once again, I could see that picture of the Sacred Heart. I could see Jesus there before me, and I was not having it at that moment. Nope, sorry. He wasn't getting in that easy. No. That wasn't going to happen. Not on my watch. There were things he had to reconcile with. There were things that he had done that he needed to know about. And I was fuming about it. I was fuming over there in the seat. I wanted to tell everyone in there that, yeah, your sweet little angel there, you know, drunk himself to death there. I'll tell you about what he's got on his soul. I'll tell you about what he needs to, what I wanted him to ask me for forgiveness for. And I remember it was not just a few seconds later that here comes the minister saying, you know, take this moment and you can come up. And, you know, stand there at the, what we would call lectionary. I'm not sure what they call it. You can stand there and give a testimonial about him and about how you felt about him. And, there was this gleaming moment where I was so going to go up there. I was so going to, let me tell you, I remember that just being right there on the tip of my tongue. I'll tell you what I remember about Mr. DC. I will tell you the stories. What he did to me, what he made me feel. I took a nice, happy little kid and made him want to do. Yeah, I was going to go tell them all. But once again, that picture of the Sacred Heart, that picture of Jesus, and once again, it backed off. It burned off. There was people crying. There was people in sorrow. I couldn't do it. I could not go up there and say what I wanted to say because it wasn't right. It wasn't good. I remember I sat there through the rest of it, and they played some little pop music Christian thing about, I want to be a sanctified believer or something like that. I kind of vaguely remember it, and I remember that was, but I remember thinking to myself as I was sitting there, I was like, you know, maybe he's not the one who needs to ask forgiveness at this point. And I kept thinking again back to the Sacred Heart, and if you know anything about the Sacred Heart devotion, is the idea that, you know, Jesus pours his heart out for everyone, and that, you know, no sin cannot be forgiven. And, you know, I remember we left at that point, and I was still pondering this, and it was still an overcast day, and I thought, well, I couldn't figure out where the graveyard was and where the funeral was being held, so I decided to drive over instead over to the creek and see, you know, the spot. Well, I think I knew where it was, so I drove over there, and sure enough, yep, there it was, and there was another car over there, and you could see the big burn mark, you know, it was obvious. So I pulled a little away, and I started to walk up, and I realized, I don't know how I did the timing at this, but it was the widow there at the you know, the mark, the scene, and she was crying, and she had the car door open. She was listening to that Sanctified Believer song, and I remember stopping there, and it was one of those moments too, because it's breezy, like I said today, and like my, you know, trench coat was fluttering in the breeze there, and I was thinking to myself, you know, this poor woman here, just suffering and sorrow for the loss of her husband, and she was so sad, and it was just so traumatic. Here she was, a widow at the ripe old age of 28 to 27, and you know, with 2 small children to raise, and I was gloating over the loss of her husband, and I was feeling this sick joy at it, and it just, you know, she started to walk towards me, and I wanted to say something, but what do you say? Hey, you know. So I just let her walk on by, and then I went over there, and I sat there for a minute, and you know, it just hit me that I just couldn't hold it anymore. I couldn't do it, so I went back and I got in the car. And as I was driving back home, I said the prayer. I said to Jesus, I said, please, Jesus, just, you know, take him into your arms, and I forgive him, and I'm sorry. And I said, please, you know, forgive me, because, you know, I held it too long. It poisoned my system. It was, you know, I'd overcome it, you know, emotionally and physically. I'd moved beyond, but it pollutes your soul, and it stays in there. And it was just the darkness that was festering, you know, it just an evil that stayed within me. And it was funny because at that moment, you know, it literally was, pardon the overly played metaphor, but it was the clouds parted and the sun shone through, and I mean, you know, I felt it lift. I felt all those years, those 15, 16 years of hatred just leave me, and you know, sometimes you do have to leave that behind you, and you do have to move on, and you know, God's always willing to help you with that for sure. But you know, things do get better. Things do move on. Bullies aren't as evil as they seem to be at times. They really should consider what they're doing first, but, you know. And there's ways to, there's things we should do to avoid it, but in the end there is forgiveness, and there is life after, and there is happiness. If you know where to look for it, you know who to ask for it. But that's the story of that part of King Lear. There's more stories to the King Lear story, but we'll tell those another day. Thanks, and God bless.